All right, welcome back, guys. This is another Tim Cain video. It's been a while since we watched one of his. This one is on digital stealing and fairness, which I guess would mean piracy, which I have a video up on our YouTube channel about piracy, about my feelings of piracy. But we're going to see what Tim Cain's are and see if he kind of agrees with us or if we differ on some things. He's been in the industry for a lot longer than me, so maybe he has some different views on it, having worked on way better games, way bigger games than I've ever made, so see what he says.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Today I want to talk about digital stealing, in quotes, and fairness.
Yeah.
And I want to explain what I mean by that, but
Okay.
before I do, I want to give some background. Love giving context on these. I've made several videos that received a great deal of reaction, strong reaction, to the extent that made me rethink my own beliefs. I was basically looking at my own beliefs and going, maybe I shouldn't think it this way. And, was there any hypocritical thinking here? Those videos.
By the way, that introspection is really what separates, in my mind, somebody who is really worth working for or working with versus somebody who's not. It's okay to defend a point that you think is right because, you don't know that you're wrong. But at the same time, once you're presented with that better information or you're presented with a different perspective, then yeah, you should think, well, maybe my view on it is incorrect. So, of course Tim is like that, because what is Tim not good at? Well, art, I guess. Me and I share that.
Videos were my video on capitalism. By the way, I'll link these all below. And then I did a video on game development caution. I did 2 parts, part 1 and 2.
I think we watched those.
And then I did kind of 2 linked videos about what do gamers want, and do developers even know what gamers want?
Those were good ones. We watched those.
All of those had huge reactions.
Yeah, those were great.
And I like to think that a lot of people watching those videos started thinking about those topics themselves a little deeper, either based on what I said or what people in the comments said. Because
I think that they did, though. You become a bit cynical when you're in the industry for long enough, because you realize that there's a good percentage of players that do not give a shit about any of the problems that are on the game dev side. Understandably so, right? Like, I go to a restaurant because I want food. I don't really care about the problems in the kitchen. You've promised me a service. I'm paying for that service. I would like good service. That's fair, right? Though I think there are things that gamers demand or do that they don't understand will have a negative impact on them once that gets implemented into the pipeline and gets fed to them. And they act like they shouldn't care about that's our job to worry, but because of their requirements or the things that they expect from game dev, it can backfire. And I think that they should care about that, or that they should at least understand the pipeline to the extent, is what I'm asking for going to result in what I actually want? But I think that's always been in the industry, and I don't know if it's ever going to be solved in that way. I don't use AI for anything like that, just for like moral reasons. I want, if I'm buying a game, I want a game made by humans, and if I'm selling a game, I want a game that is made by humans to go to the market. So
I did. Although I do know, at least judging on the comments, that there are some of you that are 100% positive on your own beliefs with no doubt whatsoever. So that group of people, those of you who are absolutely 100% sure of everything that you ever think, I'm not addressing you today.
Chat.
I'm talking about the other people who watch my channel who like to think about these topics and dive into them, because there's one I want to chew into today about digital stealing. And the reason I want to talk about that is I did 2 other videos that, taken together, made me think about this. And the thing I'm thinking about is it okay to take someone else's work digitally, not physically, without paying for it? And I said it generically like that because I had 2 videos that seemed to get fundamentally different and somewhat hypocritical reactions. One of them was on game piracy. And I'll link it below, a lot of people in the comment section said, yeah, game piracy's fine. I do it. It's fine. They view it as, look, this is what they usually say. Either they couldn't buy it, it wasn't available in their country, or it wasn't available wherever they were, or they literally did not have the money.
It's true. Yeah.
Which basically boils down to is they wouldn't have bought it.
And those are the biggest reasons for it. Those, along with, there's two big reasons, although not having the game available is, I think, the third biggest. The two biggest ones are to try the game out, and to because they can't afford it. So, and I think that performing the piracy, the act of piracy, is different than thinking that it's okay. You might do it, but still know that it's the wrong thing to do. Or you might think, well, the reasons I'm doing it are valid because, for instance, I want to try the game. This is kind of an industry standard, is to have a demo or at least like a refund window. But there are, to be fair, some games that I think do require more than 2 hours before you can realize, is this a game meant for me or not? I mean, some games have really long tutorials, and you can't really get a sense of how the game is going to really play in a lot of tutorials because they're very hand-holdy, especially like Sandbox. Imagine a Sandbox game with a 2-hour tutorial, but it's all handheld and it's all linear. Well, I can't get a sense of how it feels when everything is in rhythm because it's all being force-fed to me. And yeah, to me, I would say, well, piracy is still against the law, but I think this is a relatively valid reason to do it because you have no other way to tell. I don't know. It's such a tough topic, but I don't really give a shit if people pirate my games. It doesn't bother me.
So there are no sales lost. So it was okay to pirate it. There were absolutely no sales were lost. And because the thing that was stolen was digital and not physical, there's no thing stolen. There was no physical thing stolen. It didn't prevent anyone else from buying it. So if I understood it, that was most of the people watching that video's justification on piracy. We were particularly talking about game piracy, but basically it was software piracy or any kind of digital piracy. Or is it? Because I did another video a while later called Fun with AI.
Mm-hmm.
And it generated a lot of negative reaction. People saying I was stealing from artists because generative AI steals work from artists and repackages it. And I was a little surprised because I literally made that as a lighthearted video, and it was really obvious I wasn't going to buy any of the art. I wasn't buying anything. I wasn't looking for prints of these. I wasn't looking to make a game with this, make money off of it. I was just having fun with AI.
Well, and yeah, we mentioned that yesterday when we were talking about AI, and it's the reason why I predict that it's a gimmick. People aren't paying for AI art. Nobody is selling an AI art piece, and other people are purchasing it because if the bar is so low to generate that image, and even if you can reverse prompt that image out of an AI to then generate something yourself, really the cost of any AI image is always going to be the cost to generate that image. Always. And as that becomes cheaper, the eventual value of an AI generated image just keeps going down and down and down until it's absolutely worthless, right? After the electricity costs or the GPU power, or, the amount of power needed to generate these images, that will continue to get cheaper and cheaper, and therefore the value will become absolutely worthless. But an actual artist taking the time to build something unique and bespoke, and even something a bit more complex, will always maintain that value, just because we have kind of hit the plateau of where how much time it takes to make those legitimate art pieces. I'm sure some people are paying for AI art when they were expecting human creation. Yeah, I agree with that. I 100% agree with that. And I think even going back to like Tim Kane's point with, what's the thing that people say, right? Like piracy isn't stealing if buying isn't owning. I get the sentiment, but this is obviously not true, right? And the same people that say that are the ones who say, well, we want games classified as goods. Okay, well, a good costs money. Same with a service, to be honest. So if you are stealing a good just because somebody else can't buy it, doesn't mean that you haven't taken something with value. This is a collection of code, a collection of assets packaged into a runnable executable that provides you with an experience. This is it's I think it's a really kind of brain dead take to say that digital goods and services are not valuable. If they weren't valuable, they wouldn't be sold and people wouldn't make money off of it. And arguably speaking, people are making more money off of digital goods than they are physical goods. So I think it's less about whether or not piracy is stealing, because it obviously is. It's more about whether there are legitimate reasons to. I don't know. It's not even about that. I can only speak for games, really, because that's my bread and butter. If you were never going to buy the game, you could fairly argue that a piracy isn't a lost sale, right? If we are going back, down to the exchange of currency for that product, you have stolen something. Yes. But that doesn't mean that the individual has lost that money or didn't gain that money. If you were never going to buy it in the first place, you've just stolen something without that attached conversion, or that handshake, right? And I think the focus should not be on whether or not piracy is good or bad, or whether or not it's moral or immoral, or whether or not it's a sale or a lost sale, or whatever. I think the focus should be on, that people are going to pirate. There's very little that you can do to prevent it. But there is proven data to show that a good majority of players can be converted from pirates to purchasers. That's in the data. It's over 50% of people can be converted. So your goal should be trying to convert those people rather than making any sort of negative statement about them or about their financial situation, whatever. Digital goods can be infinitely reduplicated at essentially no cost. Duplication doesn't take it away from the original owner, so theft as a concept doesn't really apply. You're stealing the intellectual property. You're duplicating the intellectual property, which is a license when you purchase the game. And if you do that without the license, you are breaking the law. So it is theft. Pirating a game when you're a broke 13-year-old kid is fine. Well, I mean, it is stealing. It is you got the intellectual property, you got the program without paying for it. It is theft. It's as simple as that. But I think that that's the wrong focus of the conversation, because we can't solve it. I mean, how many millions of bucks have probably the largest movie studios or music producers or whatever, how much have they spent probably trying to combat piracy? It hasn't worked. Not it at all.
The title suggested, which I thought would be okay, but a lot of you didn't think that was okay. And that got me thinking, and that's something I wanted to explore here and see if people in the comments would have good views on this, which is I'm looking for a fair and consistent belief to hold where those two kinds of things, piracy and generative AI, make sense. Because these are some of the things I thought about. So if you have an answer for me, it should address a lot of these things. First of all, is it okay for solo game developers, or small indie developers to use generative AI art? I mean, they couldn't afford to have paid a human artist. So again, no sales were lost, right? So if I understand the piracy folks' argument, that would be perfectly okay. Indies and solo developers are off the hook for using generative AI.
Yeah, I think Tim actually brings up a good point. There's a lot of hypocrisy here for it. Look, I'm going to be honest. I think it is theft. When you pirate somebody's intellectual property, they own it. They are licensing it to it. They're licensing it to you when you purchase the game. And if you obtain that without the license, that is theft. It's as simple as that. It doesn't mean that it's not an exchange of goods right at that point of duplication. It's the exchange of goods at the purchase of that license.
But some of you might go, well, wait, then they're going to sell their games and make money. And I don't sell the games that I pirate. So that's a big difference. To which I would go, well, wait a minute. Many of you pirated games and then reposted the cracked versions. So you cracked the piracy, the DRM or whatever else was preventing it from being
which is
copied.
illegal.
Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just posted some all the data files up on the internet.
Which is also
by
illegal.
doing so, you certainly did cause some lost sales.
Yes.
Maybe you wouldn't have bought the game, but I guarantee you at least one person who downloaded those files probably would have bought the game had you not made it available. So you did make sales get lost.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that pirate just for the sake of doing it because they can, right? Because it's, well, I could either spend $60 or I could not spend $60. And for, I think for the majority of people, $60 is quite a lot to spend on a game. There are some people to whom that doesn't matter. It's a drop in the bucket for how much they make. But for a lot of people, it's a price point barrier, right? When they look at it, and look at this. Tim worked on a game called Outer Worlds. He worked at Obsidian. Outer Worlds just slashed its price from $80 to $70, which I would still argue is pretty expensive for what that game probably will be. But either way, money matters. And they can take a look at sales and pre-orders and the amount of interest in it, the amount of, and see that price is a very important part to purchasing a game. There was a study that I went to a talk to about. This is kind of a tangent, but it was a study about Steam. And you take a look at a game on Steam, and they were using an eye tracker to determine where people were looking at the most. And they were using that to draw a conclusion that, well, up here, this broadcast is the first thing that people look at. The second thing that people look at is the section of screenshots. The third thing is this. And they kept going down the page listing off importance, and I noticed that price was one of their lowest rated things that was being looked at. So I delved into that. I asked a question like, why was price so low? And they later made it known that they had told the people that they would buy them whichever game they chose from the list that they were being shown, 3 games. And I'm like, okay, well, you've now ruined this study because there's no price barrier for these people. They've basically been told, hey, find the game that you think is the coolest, and we'll buy it for you for free. So, to me, I want to know exactly where and when people are looking at the price and how important that is, and I think that it's a very important aspect to whether or not somebody likes the game. They can say, oh yeah, this game looks great, this is awesome, and I don't know, let's say this was $100, and they'd be like, fuck that, I'm out of here, I don't care how good the game looks. I'm not spending $100 on that. So I think price is very important, and I think a lot of the reason people pirate is 1,000% because of price. 50,000 PC gamers surveyed, and one of the biggest reasons for piracy this is by age. Age is fine though. We can generally see the 2 biggest by far bars, purple and red. And what is purple and red? To demo the game and because they can't afford the game. And the 3rd and 4th biggest ones are the blue and green, the light blue and green. The light blue it's unavailable in their country, and the green one is too expensive. So again, you have 2 massive pieces of this graph that are just purely because people can't afford the game. And then the next biggest one, if we combine those, is to try the game. So if you make a good demo and you price your game fairly, you have stopped a good majority of the people that pirate. And the people that refuse to pay is, in most cases, if you're really young, it's because you don't have the money, right? And as you get older, that goes down to an average of like 15 to 10%. The point for piracy is that piracy isn't a magic free product button. It is often very inconvenient and can be quite dangerous. That too, yeah. And that's why Gaben says, if you make the service to obtain a game legitimately better than this service to get the game for free, people will go for the better service in a lot of cases. And even diving in deeper, the reason for piracy by country, in a lot of countries, it's sad to admit, but in countries where you make more money on average, people pirate for fewer reasons than being able to not, I worded that horribly. In countries where you generally make more money, the reasons for piracy are more aligned with trying out the game than because the game is too expensive. Like, take a look at France or something, or Denmark, right? And you make a lot of money in these countries. The value to the dollar is pretty high, same with like Belgium. But then you have, countries where that may not be as great: Serbia, Montenegro, the Philippines, Argentina, of course, with this would have been during a pretty high point in their inflation. That's really what it is. Brazil, Romania, Poland. Yeah, Polish games are really expensive. And then you have like Norway, Germany. It's, I don't know. I just don't think piracy is really that big of a deal that developers make it out to be, because they see, oh, there are this many people pirating your game, and they don't stop to ask, well, can they afford your game? Can they actually afford your game? Do you have a demo out? Why are they pirating your game? Never any nuance to that discussion.
But what if you say taking something digital with no intent to sell it is okay? Well, that's a really broad statement, because are you saying that people can...
It's not okay.
If people somehow got a hold of your text messages or your emails or anything that you're storing right now in the cloud, that's okay for them to take it? Even if they have no intention of selling it to anybody, they just want to look at it. So is that okay?
Well, this is also one of the arguments that Stop Killing Games uses, and I'm not a big fan of it. It's just like, you buy the game, you own it, you should be able to host a private server. But the reality is, okay, this is still somebody else's IP. Even if the game is, quote, dead, that doesn't mean the IP dies with it. And you have to obtain permission to host that server or to monetize off of it, especially because then you are monetizing off of somebody else's IP that they own. And if they haven't given you permission to do that, it is 100% what Stop Killing Games is asking for. It is. It's not a lie. It's not a lie. They're asking for permission to host those servers after the game dies. And servers cost money to run. It's not a lie. I just looked it up, and the law actually does distinguish copyright infringement and theft, because the former doesn't deprive the owner of their property, at least our SCOTUS ruled as such. I don't know about Poland. They are asking for ways to play multiplayer games after they're dead. And yeah, that has been exactly what Ross has told me in person in our interview. So this isn't even what they've written down, but what I was specifically told. They want the files to be able to run servers after the game has, quote, died, and the developers aren't hosting those servers anymore. And they either want the runnable executable or the raw code for it. And both of those things are still owned by the company even when the game dies. I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Just that the company still owns it. And a lot of people who support SKG do not understand this concept, or they refuse to admit that it's real. I want Stop Killing Games to work. It's just that the company still owns it, and no matter what happens, I don't think the EU is going to remove that ownership when the game dies. Meaning that the company can still send you cease and desist letters or determine the finer points of the license, but that also then assumes that the EU is going to do mandatory licensing, some other M word, like forced licensing, which would be unprecedented. That's never happened before for something like video games. So there's just a lot of legal stuff that has to happen in order for people to be able to freely run their private servers. Because even right now, private servers are in most cases unregulated, like mods. And I think that that's the best way for them to exist, is the developers and publishers kind of still have control, but they don't really exercise it unless it's really bad. So the moment you enter the regulation space and you have a commission or a lawmaking body regulating the release of those servers, You then have to regulate the licenses for the servers, and then the people running the servers actually do come under some regulation, including GDPR regulations, which would mean most likely that if you wanted to host a private server for a game from the US, you would still have to follow all GDPR rules if you have even a single EU player. If you're going into negotiations and asking for more than you want as a way to have something left after all the cuts are done, I don't know. I think that the pendulum could swing either way. The pendulum could even swing in the way that the regulations on private servers and all that will be worse than it is now. I don't know. Companies have a right to not publish their code? Yeah. What if the code has secret or advanced logic that they don't want to expose? Yeah, and they own the code. And they own the code even if the game dies, and there will be a lot of companies that will argue, well, SKG's legislation is being drafted, if they even decide to draft legislation, that they can't release this code because, for instance, EA might be using, let's say Rainbow Six Siege dies. Well, Rainbow Six Siege has good anti-cheat, I imagine, or yeah, there might still be cheaters, but it still has anti-cheat. And if they release those files, that could be exposing other games that use the same libraries and code bits that Rainbow Six Siege does, like Apex, right? So there's going to be a lot of little nuances to this that will, I think, pick apart the desire from players. And that, on top of that, I think that the EU themselves has already classified games as services. They did this themselves. And I don't think all games are services, but I also don't think all games are goods. And there is a distinction that needs to be made on a per game basis of whether or not is this a service, is this a good, and can it even have end of life support. And that will all have to be in the legislation, because if they leave it vague, publishers will take advantage of that. First, I think AI is going to blow up the whole concept of IP. Maybe. I don't know. Or the laws will get more strict. We'll see.
Because you're saying, some of you are going, well, wait, there's a privacy thing here. Well, when people put some digital files up, they intend it to be private in the sense of, unless you pay for it, you don't have a version you're allowed to copy. But
code is the same way.
Forget that. What if you say, what if I just steal things to learn?
I'll show you. I'll show you an example. I was using this yesterday, right? And I was taking a look at some of its code. On all the code, he has a copyright for his code. As simple as that. And he specifically states his permission to use this code for this software for any purpose, including commercial applications, to alter it, redistribute it freely, subject to certain restrictions. And if you break those restrictions and the owner of this learns about it, he can send you a cease and desist. And if he feels like it has monetarily damaged him or the reputation of him, his company, whatever, he could sue you for those damages. Code is owned. And forcing a company to release their code, like what Stop Killing Games is requesting, is a forceful mandate of what they must do with their IP, which no lawmaking body has ever really done before for something like games. So it would be very unheard of. But we'll see what happens.
From them, because copyright law does actually include a fair use clause for educational use. Yep. By the way, it also includes fair use clause for parody, but parody is really oddly defined because it's one of those like porn. It's, well, the judge will have to look at it.
An executable phrase is code. It's the same reason why, for instance, when I was modding Darkest Dungeon, I was asked I could modify assets and files, but I could not share the executable. The executable is where a lot of that compiled code goes into, and that's still owned by the company. So the executable is still owned by the company. Anything that they make for that game is owned by the company and is part of their IP.
And agree that it was parody. But the question there is, okay, so you've copied something you've taken something that's copyrighted,
Yeah.
something digital, to learn from. Well, how closely can you follow what you've learned from in making something new? I looked it up, and the law said 50%. You have to transform it at least 50%. But
It's hard
it
to
doesn't
define.
have any rule for how that 50% is calculated.
Yeah.
Does it mean if you take a piece of art and change at least 50% of the pixels? That is not what it means. Basically, it requires a human judge to look at it and say, you have done at least 50% transformation.
Good luck on that one.
That seems like a really weird, premise
Yeah.
for triggering whether or not you've changed something enough, you've learned something enough to make your own art. So I'm talking about human artists learning from other artists, or human programmers learning from other programmers. When does their art and code become their own?
Well, the thing is, there's probably a lot of actions that we do all the time, including, like for me, prototyping Colden Chronicles. I probably broke a lot of IP laws, copying in sounds and images, and I could argue, well, it's not being commercialized, but that's not a legal defense in this case, really, because I don't have the right to distribute it. The companies don't care, though, because I'm not really causing damages, I'm not causing reputational harm to them, and they have way more important legal battles to fight than coming after some tiny screamer for using their sound in a prototype with the intention of replacing it in any way. They're not, it's not malicious. So I think all of us probably in chat, and me included, are breaking, IP laws, copyright laws all the damn time. But we're just not doing it to an extent that is worth litigating. But that doesn't change the fact that it is against the law. And for instance, like you say, Femoid, even though it's hard to decompile an exe, it is still owned by the company. And because we're all kind of existing in this legal gray area, or even breaking the rules sometimes, but we're just not doing it enough to get in trouble. The moment you start to mandate that, you have to take it out of the gray area, and you have to put legislation in that, because the legislation needs to protect the companies and the consumers. And to do that, you need very, very careful, not vague writing, specific writing, in order to protect everyone at the table. And I know one of the Stop Killing Games' common phrases is reasonable playable state. That is not good enough for legislation. So you have to define what that means. And I think that that's so hard to define that it is potentially unable to be defined. And that's going to be a big point of contention when they start to look at whether or not they can draft legislation to help consumers here. Ultimately, though, I think that the likely outcome is just that they're going to make it more strict to have wording and end of life notices, and maybe some consumer protection for end of life, right? Like if you've bought the game 6 months before end of life was announced, you are entitled to a full refund without question. I don't know. I assume that it's going to be more like that, if anything, and not on the other end of the spectrum.
And this factors in because a lot of AI now is teachable. So does teaching an AI count? If I teach an AI how to code, is it no longer stealing code? Is that okay to have an AI programmer if I teach it?
I think so.
And now it can do a lot of code for me that I couldn't have done, or it can at least do code faster than me.
Yeah, I think there are some companies that have done this. They've done training data for their AI off of their own content, which means that all of the training is on their own copyright, and therefore, yeah, technically it shouldn't have any of those legal problems.
And if that's not fair, then what about students in classes? If I go teach a class of human programmers and they go out and code. In fact, aren't I teaching people right here how to do game development? Is this going to be seen as wrong in the future? Do people always have to learn things entirely on their own from first principles, or it's wrong? You can see I've gone too far down the rabbit hole, and most of you are going, no, you've overthink it. Where did I overthink it? Because if you think selling something is wrong, if taking something digital and then selling it is the wrong part, then if people take something and just repost it for free, that should be fine, right? But it's not, because not all the privacy laws come factoring in.
Well, it's not just the selling; it's the distribution and the clear intention to distribute it. It's the intent, right? If you were at least this is my personal opinion. If you were in a class teaching students how to draw and you use other people's art or you have them stencil something or whatever, then your intent is to teach them. You're not distributing it necessarily in that same way. And even, like classes showing movies, again, it's so small, the intent is tiny, but I think there is a difference between, hey, I've ripped this movie from the DVD, which is already illegal to do, by the way, even for your own usage, and I'm redistributing it on a website for other people to download, knowing that that's the purpose. You could still say that it's done for educational purposes, but this is not This is not a good enough legal defense if they feel like you've done enough damage to the company. So it requires nuance, and I think a lot of people are like, well, it's all bad or it's all good or none of it's okay or all of it's okay, and it really just depends. There's a lot of things that depend on intent, on use case, on whether or not we're talking about the legal or the moral aspect of it, and I think that those are two separate things. Piracy is illegal, simple as that. Morally, then we have to ask, or ethically, I guess would be the better way to say it. Morally, it's wrong probably too, right? If you feel like pirating is morally wrong, you're going to see it as a wrong thing. If you don't, you aren't. Ethically, though, I'm kind of okay with it, because in most cases, like we showed with the 50,000 PC gamers, most people don't pirate to steal, or to do it out of malicious intent. They pirate to try your game, and they can be converted. Or they pirate because your game is too expensive, in which case it's a waste of my time to litigate these people, or to send them cease and desist, or to get angry at them on Twitter, because they can't afford my game. So what am I going to get out of them? Their lunch money? It's bullying at that point, right? Hey, Chisla.
And also, and I've mentioned this before on this channel, ideas can't be copyrighted, only the instantiation of an idea.
Yes.
So I can tell you about an idea, and if you do the idea differently enough, that's okay. But if I post an implementation of it, whether it's a game that does the idea as a feature or a piece of code that implements that, you can't take that, because that is the instantiation of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you're probably thinking, well, Tim, there's privacy. I have rights to privacy, and that's not what we're talking about here. Well, if you violated copyright law, it seems weird that you would then fall back and go, but privacy law matters, because now you're picking and choosing what laws you want to follow. And the whole point of this is I'm trying to decide what belief I'm going to hold for all this that is at the same time both fair and consistent. I'm basically trying to get rid of the hypocrisy here. I realize there are some of you who are perfectly fine being hypocritical and holding two beliefs that clash, but I'm trying to figure out something for myself, which is stealing something digital for my own use, is it fair or is it not fair? Is stealing something digital and learning from it and then making my own thing later fair? What does own thing mean? What does making it mean? If I use an AI to make it, if it learned from the thing rather than me and it made it, is that making it? So these are all things I'm wondering about, because we're about to enter a whole new technological singularity with these AIs.
That's true.
We're going to have to figure these out.
Yeah.
And I think examining your own beliefs isn't a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign of strength. I mean, faith is good and all that, but that's for religion. It's not for law. It's not for engineering. It's not for art. And I'm hoping.
Well, we have to analyze the perfect face for it. We have to analyze the outcomes of what people are requesting if they request it, right? If we're saying, well, copyright law should be demolished, I promise you that is a very, very fast track to losing out on anything unique, because artists will no longer see it being beneficial to do their work, because it is now not against the law to copy it, to distribute it, to make money off of somebody else's IP. Somebody can sit around and say, well, I have this really cool IP for this world, this new, role-playing game on tabletop. And the moment they tell their friend takes it and builds it, and they can't do anything about it, because there is no such thing as, copyright or IP in this case. It's like, well, I understand you want to demolish it because there are a couple of bad actors that are abusing it. But there are tons of people that need the copyright law and the IP law to protect themselves, especially smaller artists that without it might get fucked over. I mean, imagine the artist who had their art stolen to make what was the Bungie game? What was the name of that? Marathon. And with the same copyright law that people are asking to be demolished or to be rewritten for Stop Killing Games to work, the most extreme members of that community are asking for something, and specifically the most extreme members of that community are asking for the demolishment of that, which would mean that you could just steal somebody's art and use it in your game, and nobody can do anything about it, so you don't have to pay them. So that's not a solution to the problem in my eyes. On the other hand, there's practically no new ideas anymore. Everything is a copy or but yeah, I think that's always been the case. I think that is in most cases that's always been the case. All art is to some extent derivative of other things. It might just be so. It might have so many different inspirations that you don't notice all the individual pieces, right? If I don't know, if I set up the background of my green screen to look like Tim Kane's little office or little room here, like one for one, it's a direct copy. But if I copy a little bit from his and a little bit from this person's and this person's, you might say, oh, that kind of looks like Tim's. Yeah, but the rest of it doesn't. So I don't think it was a copy or anything. So there's just different spectrum of that derivation. As far as self-employed artists are concerned, that's true, but waged artists already don't own their work; their employer does. That's not always true, by the way. At least in principle, a socialized system could still produce novel art without IP law. I don't think so. No. Just whatever you sign the contract of. If I hire for instance, I got a composer to make the OST, the theme song for Colden Chronicles. They still own the song. I'm licensed to use it according to the agreement that we set out. So, they own it. They can revoke that license should I abuse the terms of it, or if somebody else is monetizing off of it. But I'm allowed to use it for my stream, for the game, for any marketing, promotional materials. That's all fine.
For art. And I'm hoping one of you out there has a very fair and consistent answer for me to look at digital stuff. When can I take it? When can't I? And does that depend on how I plan to use it or not? Basically, I want to know, do you have a rule for stealing digital stuff that's clear and consistent and not hypocritical?
Okay, Tim, I accept the challenge. I will try to give my take on this and hopefully be expansive about my thoughts on this. I think it is illegal to distribute and copy copyrighted material in almost every case. However, I think that illegality exists as a safeguard for the people that own the copyright, and the intent and purpose that you use that copyrighted or redistributed material, such as to learn from on your own or to teach a class, those intents are generally seen as more morally or ethically okay, as opposed to commercializing it or distributing it for free on some site for everybody to download, like a movie or something. So I think that we're looking at like one aspect, which is the legality, another aspect which is your own personal moral views of it, and another aspect which would be like the philosophical ethicalness, whether or not it's ethical. And to me, I think training an AI on your own data, if you have a license or because even if you download something that's like part of the Creative Commons license, you are actually still licensed under Creative Commons to use it. So even if it's like open source, technically it's an open license. If you have a license to that AI and you train it on your own data, technically speaking, then anything it regurgitates is actually just a derivation of your own data. Therefore, you own everything that was used to train it and all of the output for it. But if the AI was trained on data that you don't have a license to, or that license wasn't obtained by the person training the AI And it has to be not just a personal license, but a redistribution license or a specific license that allows somebody to redistribute the output from the AI. Then you have broken the law, and that's where we start to ask, well, have you? That then puts the onus on the copyright holder to say, do we want to litigate this? Yes or no? So, like I said, if I use Skyrim's Discovery sound in Golden Chronicles, which I do, and Bethesda sent me a cease and desist because that's the cheapest thing to do than to litigate, I would have to follow it because I am breaking I am infringing upon their IP rights. How much more expensive would the music have been if you wanted to transfer ownership? Oh, that's a good question. I think it would have been over $10,000 for that. No. Kidding. I think it was only a couple thousand. I think it was 10,000 for like a whole album soundtrack, because they would do a discount for everything. But I could do it. I think the reality, hey Codex, I think the reality is you can't stop people from stealing things. Most people can't afford to litigate, and the effort and cost it takes to even find infringements is really hard. I agree. I have a few hundred patents up to my name, and each one took almost 100K in patent lawyer fees just for research. You have over a few hundred patents in your name? Jesus. How much money do you have, bro? There's all kinds of clauses for them to loophole out, saying they may be incomplete findings or worded in a way they couldn't locate. There's no clear and equal approach to copyright. I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I think that if you want my answer, Tim, the answer is the gray area that it exists in now for modding and for like derivative art is probably the best one that we've ever had that protects IP holders but also allows for people to innovate. It's not perfect, and there might be a little bit of swim room to fix some problems, but I think for the most part it's good. It's just that you have people using it so strictly that they kind of seem like bullies, like Nintendo. And you have other companies. I mean, the same laws apply to Nintendo that apply to, let's say, Jagex, right? And Jagex allows people to make money off of selling like fan books of RuneScape or physical creations, whatever. Sometimes they even put them on their merch store. So it's the same law, just being used in a different way. And I would rather, Nintendo wasn't as much of a piece of shit, but that's never going to happen while I'm alive. Worked at Dell, Samsung, and Adobe as R&D. Damn. Oh, it didn't come out of your pocket. Okay. I was going to say, like, how much money? You must be sitting there like a mansion if you have that much money to spend on patent lawyers.
I hope you do, because this is stuff I think about. Anyway, hope that gave you some things to think about.
It did, Tim. Thank you so much for making that video, Tim. And of course, if you guys want to give Tim a like and subscribe for these videos, please 100% do. That was a good video. A lot to think about. And I'm not going to pretend to be a legal expert, so if there's anything that I'm wrong about, please let me know. I would love to see it. Either way, that'll do it for that one. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching that Tim Cain reaction, and we'll have a couple more probably releasing over the weekend since I can stagger the releases. So take care, YouTube.